Republican State Senator Dan Hegeman is often at the center of substantive policy debate as the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. But this year, Hegeman is doing more than just handle the budget. He's sponsoring a big change to how Missouri draws state House and state Senate districts. The Cosby Republican joins us next on the latest edition of Politically Speaking, so let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Julie O'Donohue, and from Jefferson City, my co-host,
Jason Rosenbaum,
is with me. And we are here today with Senator Dan Hegeman from District 12 in Northwest Missouri. The senator comes from a long line of farmers, and he was previously in the Missouri House of Representatives. He's the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, so we're going to spend a good deal of our time with him talking about the state's finances. Welcome, Senator.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
I know you've been on the program before, but I'd like to hear this. Could you tell us what the boundaries of your district are? Jason tells me it's quite large.
You bet. It's 15 counties of the greater part of northwest Missouri. It's a very largely rural district. It is the biggest senatorial district in the state. It goes from Iowa border all the way down through Clay County to the Missouri River, and from the Kansas-Nebraska border almost over to the Kirksville area north and northeast of St. Joseph. So it is a large district, and again, I really enjoy the opportunity to visit with my rural colleagues there and constituents.
Well, we primarily have you on the show today to talk about the state finances. We will get to a few other topics later. You are the head of the Committee on Appropriations, and I guess I wanted to start out by asking, how do you think things are with the budget right now this year, and what do you think is going to happen in the out years?
You know, I think the budgets and the revenues are coming in well this year. And actually we are looking, for the most part, looking back 2 years for what I consider a more accurate view of the budget right now. Last year at this time we were having troubles with the withholding tables, and so if you just look back 1 year, it kind of skews the revenue that's coming in. But looking back 2 years gives us a little bit better feel for what what the revenue truly is coming in once we've corrected the withholding tables.
One thing that kind of broke over the last couple of days is the inability for the House, Senate, and Governor to come up with what's known as a consensus revenue estimate. I want you to explain to our listeners what a consensus revenue estimate is, because I think that would be helpful to knowing why. And also, is it a big deal that you couldn't come up with one?
Yeah. The consensus revenue estimate is where the House staff, budget staff, the Senate budget staff, and the governor's Office of Budget and Planning get together, and I think there's a MU professor that comes together, and they look at economic analysis and projections. They look at the revenues coming in, and they try to come up with a consensus revenue estimate. So basically one that they can agree upon. It happens every year. It really doesn't have the chairman, of the House or the Senate or the governor really involved. It's really done by the staffers. And this year I'm disappointed that we didn't come to a consensus. But that just means that we'll be working off of our own estimates as we go forward. So in this regards, the governor will have his estimate of what the revenues will have for fiscal year 2021 is the fiscal year that we'll be working on now. We did agree on the fiscal year 2020 for the continuation of this fiscal year. We did find consensus on that, but it's next year's budget that we didn't find consensus on. And so, the House and the Senate and the governor's office will be working off of a different estimate of what we get. This has happened before. This is, it's great to have a consensus revenue estimate, but, certainly we've not had them in the past and probably won't have them in the future. And we will, I really look forward to working with the governor and the House and the Senate to continue to work in a fashion like we did last year, where we had a bill that was actually truly agreed and finally passed, and the governor didn't find anything that he needed to veto in it. So I would hope that we could achieve that same goal again this year.
Can you explain, is one of you all higher than the other? I'm assuming that's the difference. Someone's coming in with a lower revenue estimate, someone's coming in with a higher. Can you give a little bit more of a detailed explanation? And is there a gap? Like, what's the size of the gap between the differences?
There's a bit of difference on what we think that the revenue estimates would be. Some of them are higher, some are lower. Look forward to working with everybody to try to achieve a budget that will address the needs of the state of Missouri and our taxpayers.
I think the other thing that a lot of people are talking about as the session begins is this specter of Medicaid expansion.
Sure.
There's a well-funded ballot initiative that is likely going to be on the ballot. And I've asked a lot of Republicans, would it make more sense to spend this session coming up with their own Medicaid expansion, figure out how to pay for it, get it done, and basically preempt this ballot initiative so you would have some flexibility and put your stamp on it. And I've gotten the sense that Republicans are not interested in doing that. They're just kind of hoping the ballot initiative fails and don't have to deal with Medicaid expansion. What's kind of your view of that scenario?
I think there's varying opinions on that. I've heard that too, that some people may be considering, looking at an alternative proposal to the initiative petition that's out there. And I've got a lot of colleagues that just flat out don't want to address it at all, and just hope to defeat the initiative petition that's out there. Either way, I mean, as the appropriations chairman, I do worry about the impact on the state's budget, and it's our discretionary dollars, our general revenue dollars is what I am concerned about. Even as the Medicaid stands in the state of Missouri right now, every year it seems like our Medicaid budget eats up or consumes more of our general revenue budget as a proportion of it, which means, and it's just we can't print money in the state of Missouri, so we do have a finite amount of money that we can use for all our discretionary services, which include higher education, elementary, secondary education, corrections, public safety, and dealing with Medicaid. So the concern there is if we increase the rolls on Medicaid, will that even make it more difficult? Will it take even more money and put more pressure on those other areas because it's considered a mandatory amount that we have to come up with to fund Medicaid every year? If we expand it, does that take more away from public education, public safety, higher education, and et cetera?
Couldn't you find other revenue streams to pay for Medicaid expansion? I mean, I know that you sponsored legislation to, I guess, allow managed care organizations to self-tax. I mean, you could tax vaping products. You could use online sales tax. You could raise the tobacco tax.
Yeah.
Like, I understand Republicans are like, I don't want to raise taxes under any circumstances, but it's not as if you don't have options to get the money and not have to take it from something else.
Yeah, I mean that would be one of the proposals, is that you come up with additional revenues to try to deal with this. I don't think, and I don't believe that's part of the initiative petition that's being proposed out there. So that would have to come from a different source. We'd have to find a different way of addressing that. Should we look at that? And of course, we are looking at the Wayfair, the internet sales tax issue out there, and we will do the federal reimbursement allowance again this year. That's a bill I have in that's how we largely fund the Medicaid in the state of Missouri as it is right now, and we've had move that forward every year, it seems like, and did have that discussion last year where we ended up not taxing the managed care entities that deal with Medicaid in the state of Missouri. Was not the will of the legislature to do that. So we've approached that. It didn't go over well, and so that's probably not an option as it sets presently. And so finding revenue streams would be one answer. Or living within our means. And putting pressure on those other areas would be another answer.
Were the managed care organizations willing to go along with being assessed a fee or a tax?
Like most things, some were and some weren't. Some of the entities that work with the state of Missouri in the managed care with our Missouri Health Net, I think were inclined to allow that, and then some other managed care entities that work with the private sector industries were less inclined to see that pass.
It seems like the House leadership is very concerned about what's going to happen with the budget, not necessarily this year, but in future years. They foresee a lot of pressures on the budget.
Yep.
I was wondering if you were in agreement, and could you explain what some of those pressures are beyond Medicaid expansion?
You bet, yeah, and that's why I think we're all looking at conservative budgets, no matter what view we come at from this the House, Senate, or the governor's office. Some of the pressures that we see out there, we've had an extremely long expansion now of our economy. At some point, there is bound to be a fallback, a recession, and so I think many of us are wanting to prepare for that so we don't end up in a situation where we're having to do a lot of budget cuts and core cuts to address the issue. The expansion or the increase in the minimum wage out there, and as that translates through state government and the entities that we fund, that's some additional pressure as well. Medicare that goes to nursing homes, some of our rehab facilities, some of our development disabled facilities, independent living centers. They all, are concerned about the expansion of minimum wage and the impact on their budgets, and so that's something that we need to address. There's a couple of court cases out there that are looming, and should they finally get resolved, they could be very high amounts.
Like the Department of Corrections.
The Department of Corrections one is the one that is looming out there right now, and that will certainly put some pressures on the state budget. And so all these things taken together, is why I think all of us are looking at coming in with a fairly conservative budget, and largely like to put some money on the bottom line to be able to address, like I say, these issues as they come forth.
Could you explain briefly, just in case people aren't familiar, what the Department of Corrections lawsuit is?
Well, certainly I'm not an expert on it, but to my understanding, there was a lawsuit brought forth dealing with the timekeeping and responsibilities going along with correctional officers. Basically, we're asked to do some work off the time card, I guess. To my understanding, it is basically like when they were checking in and then didn't get paid until they got to their assignment location. And so that, that may be like 15 minutes it took for them to walk to that. And I think that's where the courts came down. You multiply that times the number of officers out there times the number of years, and it becomes a considerable amount of money.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to talk about Clean Missouri and low-income housing tax credits. And we're back with Senator Dan Hegeman of Northwest Missouri. Jason, I'm going to throw to you to talk to the senator about the next couple topics.
So one of the topics I've been following for many years is the low-income housing tax credit issue, which I know that you were knee-deep in last year as the handler of a Senate bill that lowered the amount of state low-income housing tax credits that could be divvied up every year by the Missouri Housing Development Commission. It passed the Senate, which I thought was the big hurdle, and then it ran into more changes in the House, and nothing ended up getting done. The governor said at the beginning of last session that he was not going to restart the program unless the legislature did something. I talked with him again, and he seemed to be kind of wavering from that, and there is some expectation that he may restart the program even if the legislature doesn't do anything. If he is going to restart the program, does that mean there's really going to be no effort to change the low-income housing program.
Well, I think we're still going to try to, as I introduced the bill again, to try to provide some legislation and guidance on that program. Many folks have been concerned about the amount of money that we put to that program. There are already federal tax credits out there for low-income housing. I like to call it workforce housing. And there's a great need in many of our areas for workforce housing. And so it'd be nice to match that with a state program, but there certainly is some desire to put some caps on it. Right now, it has no caps on the program. It's 100% of what the federal government has, and I think that the state, just here again, it comes down to this or that. It's a matter of priorities. Do we want to put money into this, or do we need it for nursing homes? Do we need it for the elderly? Do we need it for corrections and such like that? And so it's just a matter of priorities. Any tax credits really come off the top, are never discussed as we go through the appropriations process. It's just money that we don't have, in the budget to deal with. And so it doesn't get the opportunity for the legislature to decide where is the best use of those dollars because it just comes off the top.
Do you think that Governor Parson should direct his MHDC appointees to restart the program before session is over?
I hope that we can get the legislation passed again. So it's a very similar piece of legislation that we had last year, capping it at 72.5% of the federal amount of for low-income housing, as I like to say, workforce housing. And we've got some other provisions in there to try to deal with some changes as well. Basically, where we ended up last year, as we dealt with the House, that it did pass out of the Senate 33-0. So I mean, we got some unanimity passing out of the Senate. Ran into the House, and we were just capping it last year in the Senate. The House wanted to put some additional measures in it to drive some efficiency into the program and to get a bigger bang and a bigger return on our dollars in that program. And that's where we got hung up and weren't able to get it done. So I'd love to see us be able to pass this legislation at the end and give support, legislative support in this, and put the cap on it. There is always an opportunity. It was stopped by a governor's action, and it could certainly start up again with the governor's action as well. But we will have the discussion once again.
I want to move on to Clean Missouri, which I think is going to be a big flashpoint early in the session. You are one of, I guess, 3 or 4 senators who have sponsored a constitutional amendment to make changes to the 2018 amendment. We've talked about Clean Missouri a lot on this show. Sure. Okay. I'm not going to rehash what it does, but it does stuff with lobbyist gifts, lobbyist waiting period, sunshine law for legislative documents, but most importantly, state legislative redistricting. Yeah. And I read through your proposed constitutional amendment, and it goes from $5 per lobbyist gift to $0 a lobbyist gift. And it basically goes from the current system where a demographer holds much of the power to draw House and Senate districts to where a commission had first crack at the districts, but more often than not, appellate judges drew it. Am I describing your amendment correctly?
Yeah, it really gives the voters the opportunity to once again look at this issue and see if they'd like to instead of empowering a demographer that has a great deal of power and has a number of criteria that I think will dramatically impact my communities. I will tell you, I came out against it. When it passed, and I talked against it. My fear is that it will break up communities of interest that are near and dear to my heart in the rural areas and also in the urban, inner city areas. I think these are communities of interest that have a distinctive flavor to them. And I think that they will lose their voice. Their voice will be diminished in this effort, and that's why I brought forth the resolution again to give the voters another opportunity to look at this issue and basically come up with districts that I think will be less gerrymandered than the issue that passed under the pretense that it would get away from gerrymandering. I am fully convinced that we will have very interesting, long, stringy districts under the constitutional amendment that passed.
Obviously, the proponents of Clean Missouri are not for your amendment.
Sure.
Sean Sonker Nicholson, who was the campaign manager for it, has tick through a number of contentions about what your proposal does. Sure. One of the things he says is it, quote, guts fairness rules, because I think it takes the formula about competitiveness and fairness and moves it down the list of priorities and also makes changes to it. Is that accurate, first of all?
My bill would make contiguous districts and compact districts a higher priority, so you don't break up counties, so you don't break up cities, you don't break up communities, or less likely to do that, which is where we have been in the past. This is basically where we've had it in the past, and gives that to a bipartisan commission to look at drawing these boundaries again. And I like the concept of not breaking up what I call communities of interest, because I think that they have a distinct flair. I think Northwest Missouri is different than inner city St. Louis, inner city Kansas City, different than Southeast Missouri. And I relish, I cherish that distinctiveness, as well as I cherish the distinctiveness of those other areas. Kansas City, St. Louis, Columbia has a different flair. Southeast Missouri, Southwest Missouri, we all have different aspects and different takes on what's important to the state. And I love those cultural aspects come into the legislature, and I feel that this bill would break those communities of interest up at the desire to get what your gentleman would call a fairness issue, to try to get to a competitive district. Mm-hmm. I think there's some areas of the state that there are just not there's not maybe that competitive of districts because they reflect the character and the nature of the people.
I feel like the real issue with Clean Missouri is the prior system emphasized compactness. And the reality of Missouri is Democrats are highly condensed in St. Louis, Kansas City, and to some extent Columbia, and the inner ring suburbs. So as long as compactness is emphasized as a top priority over competitiveness and fairness, Democrats are naturally going to be at a disadvantage. And really the only, way for them to have more seats is to maybe have – I don't know if what you said – like long spaghetti string districts like across from like Hannibal to Nottoway County is going to happen, but they're going to have to be, especially in the St. Louis, Kansas City area, like Kansas City will go east-west, St. Louis will go like southwest-northwest, something like that. Yeah. But the Democratic people would say, well, that'll create more competitive districts, and that will create a more responsive slate of legislators. What would you have to say to that?
Well, and I think it comes at the expense of these communities of interest. I think it comes at the expense of the strong, support from cultural communities that truly reflect the nature and the aspect of their area. I value that, and that's why I'd like to give the people another shot to take that into consideration as they look at this piece of legislation.
I wanted to ask you about a piece of legislation you filed this year to change the way the nonpartisan court plan works. Basically, right now, there's a commission that picks 3 judges for a specific judicial seat. They forward the names to the governor. The governor picks from the list of 3. Your legislation would empower the governor more. The commission would have to forward all the names of the qualified candidates, at least this is the way I read the legislation, to the governor, and then the governor would be able to pick someone from a much larger list of names. Why do you think it's important for the governor to have a bigger role in picking judges?
I've had this bill resolution in for a number of years now, looking at the nonpartisan court plan. Right now I think there's a choke point in the process of these 3 individuals that are moved on to the governor for his selection. And if the governor doesn't select them, then it falls back to the committee to select one. So basically, the governor has to choose one of those 3 or nothing. And I'd just like to give the governor more choice so that he could take into account some geographical, aspects. Try to get some greater balance. Have around the state. Have some urban, suburban, rural judges that go on to the appellate and the Supreme Court and such like that. Right now, I feel like the process limits the governor's ability to take those type of things into consideration, and I really would just like to give the governor more options to look at qualified candidates. It still allows the committee to determine, or the commission to determine, who would be qualified, and honestly allows them to come up with the qualifications for people to be brought forth to the governor. And right now, and it would still require at least 3 to be submitted to the governor, but it could be more than that. It would basically just says that all qualified candidates, and again, it's their qualifications that they would have to meet, but they would be able to go to the governor, and then the governor could select from a larger pool.
So I want to make sure I understand the bill. Does the bill require all the people who might be interested, who happen to meet some set of criteria, to be forwarded to the governor, or does it just allow for a larger pool of applicants? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right now, it would require all qualified applicants to be submitted to the governor.
I think some cynics, probably from the Democratic side, would look at this bill and say, well, you're a Republican. Missouri's trending conservative, which means the governor's more likely to be a Republican moving forward. You're just trying to empower a person that you assume is going to be a Republican to pick the judges. What would you say to someone who said something like that, looking at the bill cynically?
Well, this doesn't. The governors come and go. I mean, I've had the pleasure of serving under Republican and Democrat governors. It would just give the governor a greater say in the pool of applicants, let's say, and to be able to, like as I said earlier, to take into consideration geographical placement. Again, bringing those cultural differences from rural Missouri to suburban Missouri to urban Missouri, and allowing them to be reflected in the judiciary as well.
Do you feel like there are a dearth of judges from rural areas?
I do.
No. Okay.
I do. I do. I feel like because of the way it's set up right now, I do feel like that some of the rural judges, southern Missouri judges, northern Missouri judges, maybe don't have as a great an opportunity to make that panel to begin with. As the folks that see each other in the urban areas on a monthly or daily basis.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking right now of the Missouri Supreme Court. There's Patricia Breckenridge, who's from Nevada, Missouri. There's obviously Zell Fisher, who's I think from your district in Tarkio, if I'm not mistaken. And the newest one, Brent Powell, I think he's from the Kansas City area, and then the rest are either from mid-Missouri or St. Louis. Yeah. I'm just kind of going by memory there.
And I don't think that there's any on the Supreme Court from the Southern District
I
of
think
Missouri.
that's correct.
And so in my mind, that I think that the southern part of the state should have some representation in the judiciary as well on the Supreme Court. So that's part of my motivation, is to try to get some greater diversity in the judiciary.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up. Senator, we have been asking our guests to identify a place in their district that they would like to highlight when they've been coming on the podcast recently. I'm sorry I meant to warn you about this before the podcast started.
This is probably the most controversial question we asked because you're going to offend 15 other counties by picking only 1 or 2 things.
But do you have anything in your district you'd like to highlight? We've had people choose museums, restaurants, school districts, particular schools. It's really run the gamut.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have 15 counties, so you are making it very difficult for me to pick out one. But in general, I will tell you, I think we have great institutions of higher education in Northwest Missouri, in particularly the Northwest Missouri State University and the Bearcats up there, national champions in both football and basketball this last year. And quite honestly, they do very well in some of the academic competitions as well. A great institution of higher education, very proud of the Bearcats in Maryville, Missouri, but they really represent all of Northwest Missouri.
Did you know that a few weeks ago we were asked to 3 places where I would take the Hyperloop, and one of them was Maryville, Missouri.
There you go.
Because not only am I a big fan of the campus, but there's an incredible Thai restaurant there. I don't know the name of the Thai. Do you know the Thai restaurant name? You don't live in Maryville, so of
I
course
don't,
you don't
but I
know.
go to that Thai restaurant all the time.
I'm not making guys.
It is a great Thai restaurant.
I am not making this up.
Yeah.
Like, it is probably the best Thai food I've had in the state of Missouri, and it is in Senator Dan Hegeman's district. Do whatever you possibly can to go there.
Okay, well, Senator, I'm so glad you came in. We're going to wrap up the show. Do you have anywhere, are you on Twitter, or do you have anywhere else on the World Wide Web where we can find you?
I do some modest social media on Facebook.
So search his name, by the way.
Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter at J. Rosenbaum, also on Facebook. I also have Instagram. I do not have a MySpace account anymore.
And you can find me at JS O'Donohue on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook at Julie O'Donohue. To read stories from Jason and me, go to stlpublicradio.org. Our news director is Shula Newman, our politics editor is Fred Ehrlich, and our sound engineer is John Larson. Thank you for listening and hope to have you back next time.